In October 2022, a mother of 3 stepped out of her home. She carried her youngest child in her arms. The other 2 followed closely behind. She looked over her shoulder. Once, then again. The street was empty, but she knew he was out there, somewhere. She had been afraid for days, but this morning, it felt different. She pulled her jacket tighter around her body. Beneath it, she wore a bulletproof vest. She knew what he was capable of. She had seen it, felt it, survived it. She had warned the world. She had posted the proof. She had done everything she could to protect herself, but the system didn't listen. She strapped her baby into the car seat. The older kids climbed in. They were just going to school, a normal morning, a routine drive. She started the engine. She took a deep breath. She pulled out of the driveway. She had no idea she was driving straight to her death. Minutes later, she saw the car. Her chest tightened. Her hands gripped the wheel. She didn't have to look twice. It was him, the man who had beaten her, the man she had exposed, the man who had walked free just hours earlier. He was behind her now, following, watching. Her heart pounded. She pressed harder on the gas. Maybe she could get away. Maybe she could make it to safety. But before she could react, he struck. Metal crashed against metal. The impact sent her car skidding. Her children screamed. She barely had time to think before he was there, walking toward her, a shotgun in his hands. A mother of 3 executed in front of her own children. And the system? The system let it happen. This is the story of Keira Benefield, a woman who did everything right and still ended up dead. Let's talk about Keira Hudson. In May 1992, a little girl was born in Buffalo, New York, a city known for its harsh winters and strong communities. Her name was Keira Hudson. She grew up in Buffalo, raised by a family that loved her deeply. From a young age, she was full of life, full of energy. She had dreams, she had plans, and more than anything, she had hope. She was the kind of person who made an impression. She had a smile that could light up a room. She had a way of making people feel comfortable, of making them feel like they belonged. As she grew older, life wasn't always easy. She faced challenges like so many young women do. But no matter how hard things got, she always found her way forward. Her children became her world. Every decision she made, every sacrifice was for them. She wanted them to have a safe, loving home. She wanted them to grow up knowing that they were protected, that they were cared for. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. At some point along the way, she met Adam Benefield. How exactly their paths first crossed isn't well documented, but what is known is that he wasn't always the man the world would later know him to be. At first, he seemed like someone she could trust, someone who cared, someone who could be part of the life she was building for herself and her children. But things don't always stay the way they start. What seemed like love eventually turned into something else. At first, the changes were small, a little more control, a little more jealousy, a little less kindness. And then, the first time he raised his voice, the first time he grabbed her arm just a little too hard, the first time she felt that shift deep in her chest, the one that told her this wasn't right. Maybe she convinced herself it was nothing. Maybe she thought it was just stress, just a bad day, just a moment that would pass. But it didn't, because once it starts, it almost never stops. And for Keira, it was only the beginning. No one saw the way things were changing inside the home. No one heard the arguments. No one saw the bruises. No one knew how afraid she had become. And then, one day, the world saw everything. Because Keira made sure of it, she had proof, she had evidence. A camera inside her home captured the truth. The moment Adam attacked her, the way he knocked her to the ground, the way he pinned her down, the way he punched her over and over again while she lay there helpless. The attack lasted minutes, and when it was over, she did something that most women in her position are too afraid to do. She didn't hide it. She didn't keep it a secret. She took the footage and she posted it on Facebook. She wanted the world to see. She wanted people to understand what she had been living through. She wanted help. Her post said, "This is what this man does to me, but I'm always treated like I'm the abuser." Her message was clear. She wasn't the one causing harm. She wasn't the one who should be feared. She was the one who needed protection. People saw the video, they were shocked, they were outraged, and then the police got involved. She called 911. She showed them the footage. She told them everything. And for a moment, it seemed like things might finally change. Adam Benefield was arrested. But the charges? Misdemeanors. Not attempted murder. Not felony assault. Not anything that would keep him behind bars. And because of that, he walked free. And when he did, he had only one thing on his mind: Kiera. Adam Benefield was not a first-time offender. His violence did not begin with Kiera. Long before she ever met him, before he ever entered her life, he had already shown the world exactly who he was. More than 20 years earlier, he committed a crime so severe, so terrifying, that any system built to protect victims should have seen him as a danger. But it didn't. In the year 2000, Adam Benefield kidnapped 2 women at gunpoint. One of them, an ex-girlfriend. He held them hostage. He controlled them with a weapon in his hands. He made them fear for their lives. For that crime, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. 15 years behind bars. 15 years to think about what he had done. 15 years to change, to come out a different man. But that's not what happened, because when Adam Benefield was released, he didn't leave his past behind. He became someone else's nightmare. And this time, that nightmare was Kiera's reality. She had no idea who he truly was when she met him. She had no idea that the man who once kidnapped and terrorized another woman would one day become her husband. And by the time she found out, it was too late. Because no matter how much evidence she had, no matter how many warning signs there were, the system still failed her. Arrested, then released without bail after Adam's violent attack on Kiera, after the world saw the footage, after the police became involved, there was a moment when things could have gone differently, a moment when the justice system could have done what it was meant to do, protect her. But that's not what happened. Adam was arrested, but the charges were minor. Not felony assault, not attempted murder, not anything that would have kept him locked away. Instead, he was charged with misdemeanors: 3rd-degree assault, 4th-degree criminal mischief, 2nd-degree messaging, for a man with a history of kidnapping an ex at gunpoint, for a man who was caught on video beating his wife, for a man who was a known threat. And because of that, under New York's bail laws, the judge had no power to keep him in custody. He walked out of jail less than 24 hours before Kieda's murder, free, without bail, without restriction, without anyone stopping to ask, what happens now? Kiera knew what would happen. She wasn't naive. She had lived with this man. She had seen what he was capable of. She had already suffered at his hands, and now he was free. She called her family. She told them she was scared. She told them she didn't feel safe. And then she did something that no woman should ever feel the need to do. She put on a bulletproof vest. A mother of 3, a woman who had done everything right, a woman who had begged for help, now wearing body armor just to leave her home, because deep down, she knew no one was coming to save her. Kiera Benefield woke up and got her children ready for the day. Her baby was just 6 months old. Her other 2 children were still young, too young to understand the weight of the fear their mother carried, too young to know that today would be the last time they would ever see her alive. Kiera moved through the house, packing bags, checking on her kids, making sure everything was in place. But beneath the routine there was something else, a feeling, a weight pressing down on her chest. She had barely slept the night before. Every sound outside had made her jump. Every car that passed by made her wonder, was it him? Adam Benefield was out. Less than 24 hours earlier, he had walked free, and she knew he wouldn't stay away. The law had given her nothing but a piece of paper, a protection order, a document that told Adam he was supposed to stay away. But paper doesn't stop bullets, and Kiera knew if he came for her, she wouldn't be able to stop him. She told her family she was scared. She told them she didn't feel safe. She told them she knew something was coming. And so, that morning, before she stepped out of her home, she did the only thing she could think of to protect herself. She put on a bulletproof vest. Not because she wanted to, not because she thought it would make her feel safe, but because she knew if today was the day he came for her, She at least wanted a chance to survive. She picked up her baby. She held her close. Her older children followed behind her as they stepped outside. The morning air was cool. The streets were still quiet. She walked to the car. She strapped her baby into the car seat. Her other children climbed into the back. She took a deep breath. She started the engine. She pulled out of the driveway, and then she drove. A normal school run, a drive she had taken so many times before. But today, it would not end the same. What Kara didn't know was that Adam was already watching. Somewhere just beyond her sight, he was there. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the chance to get close, waiting for the chance to make her pay for exposing him. Kara had taken away his control. She had shown the world what he had done. And now, he was going to take everything from her. He followed her, staying just far enough behind so she wouldn't notice at first. But soon, she did. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Her heart pounded. A car. Familiar. Too familiar. It was him. For a moment, maybe she told herself she was imagining things. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was just another car on the road, but deep down, she knew. It was him. He was behind her, following her, waiting. She gripped the wheel a little tighter. Her mind raced. What could she do? Where could she go? Could she outrun him? Could she make it to safety? Her hands shook as she pressed her foot down on the gas. Maybe if she got to the school. Maybe if she made it to a crowded area. Maybe. But Adam wasn't going to let that happen. He had already decided how this was going to end, and now there was nothing standing in his way. The car behind her wasn't backing off. It wasn't turning away. It was following her, staying close, keeping its distance just enough to make it clear this wasn't a coincidence. She knew who it was. She knew why he was here. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could she call someone? Would anyone get to her in time? Should she drive to the police station? Should she turn down another road, try to lose him? She didn't have time to decide, because suddenly, a collision. Her entire body jolted forward as her car was struck from behind. She gasped. Her children screamed. She struggled to regain control of the wheel. She tried to keep moving. But it happened again. Another hit, harder this time. Her car skidded. Tires screeched. She fought to hold on. She tried to straighten the wheel. But then, he cut her off. Right there. At the intersection of Shawnee and Richlawn Avenues, her car came to a halt. She had nowhere to go. The street was quiet, empty. No one around to stop what was about to happen. She reached for her phone. Maybe she could call for help. Maybe there was still time. But before she could, he was already out of his car. The door slammed shut behind him. She barely had time to react before he was walking toward her. His steps were slow, deliberate, and in his hands, a shotgun. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. This was it. This was what she had been afraid of. This was what she had tried to warn everyone about. Her children sat in the back seat, watching. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the fear. They could feel the shift in the air. Kyra's hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. She had to get out. She had to run. But before she could move, he raised the shotgun. She barely had time to blink. A single moment, a fraction of a second, and then the blast. A deafening sound tore through the air. The force of it shook the car. Her body jerked backward. And then everything went still. In the moments following the murder, Adam Benefield didn't look back. He didn't linger to check if Kieda was still alive. He didn't hesitate to watch her die. He simply turned away, as if her life had never mattered. He walked back to his car and drove off. It wasn't a desperate escape. It wasn't a panic-stricken run. It was as if he knew exactly what he was doing. He was already gone, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of a crime so senseless, so cruel, that it would shake the foundation of this small community. By the time the authorities arrived, it was too late. Kiera was already gone. Her children were left in shock, unable to process the horror they had just witnessed. But the world was about to wake up. News of Kiera's death spread quickly, like wildfire. Her family could barely believe it. They had seen the signs, they had begged for her safety, but no one had listened. Her mother, Tammy Hudson, stood in front of the cameras, her face filled with grief, but also with anger. "He should never walk free again," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. The community, too, was outraged. People who had known Kiara, people who had seen her struggle, people who had heard her cries for help, they all began to speak out. How could this happen? How could a man with a history of violence be allowed to walk out of jail just hours before taking a life? How could the justice system fail her so completely? The questions flooded the airwaves. The pain of Kiara's family was felt across the country. People wanted answers. People wanted change. But for now, all they could do was wait. Wait for the man who took Kiara's life to be caught. Wait for justice to be served. And wait for a system that had already failed one woman to step up and do what it should have done long before that fateful day. The days after Kiara's death were filled with heartbreak, but also with something else. Outrage. The man who had taken her life was out there somewhere, and the community wasn't about to let him slip away. News stations covered the case from every angle. Buffalo became a city on edge, waiting for an arrest. Families, friends, and strangers alike watched in disbelief. How could someone so dangerous walk free? How could someone with a violent history be allowed to kill without consequence? The police, after a frantic search, finally tracked Adam down. He had been on the run for nearly a week, but by the time they caught up with him, he had nowhere left to hide. He was arrested and brought back into custody. This time, there would be no release, no bail. The weight of his crime was too much to ignore. He was held without bail, knowing that his fate was sealed. The manhunt was over, but the pain was far from gone. Kiara's family was left to wait for justice. Her children were left without their mother, and for Adam Benefield, the consequences were just beginning. The trial began. Adam Benefield stood in front of the court, facing the charges that would change his life forever. He pled not guilty to the charge of murder. The audacity was almost too much to bear. He sat there, behind his defense, refusing to take responsibility for the life he had taken. Kiara's family and everyone who had followed the case waited for justice to be served. In the courtroom, Kiara's mother, Tammy Hudson, stood to speak. With tears in her eyes and a voice filled with both pain and rage, she said, "He should never walk free again." Her words echoed through the courtroom, a mother's cry for justice that would not be silenced. But Adam wasn't done yet. As the proceedings continued, his temper got the better of him. In an outburst that stunned everyone in the room, Adam shouted at the judge. "This is a setup," he yelled. "You know what the law is, and you haven't followed it. This is all a lie." The courtroom fell silent. The judge, unfazed, ordered security to remove him from the room. Adam's attempts to deflect blame were as empty as his apologies. Kiara was gone, and no amount of shouting would bring her back. After weeks of hearings, the day of sentencing finally arrived. The judge stood, ready to deliver the verdict. The courtroom was silent. Adam stood before him, knowing that his fate was sealed. "You are here today," the judge began, "because you brutally killed your wife. You took her life in front of her children. You shattered her family and left them to grieve in your wake." The judge's words were clear. They were final. Adam Benefield was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, the maximum sentence allowed. Kiara's family, her mother, her children, all breathed a sigh of relief, but no sentence could ever undo the damage he had caused. No number of years behind bars would bring Kiara back. The pain would remain. Kiara was gone, and nothing would ever change that. But in that moment there was at least some sense of justice, some small piece of peace. And for Kiara's children, her mother and her family, it was a small victory in a fight they never should have had to face. In the aftermath of Kiara's death, questions began to surface. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Could the system have done more to protect her? Kiara had done everything right. She reported the abuse. She showed the evidence. She took the necessary steps to protect herself. And yet, she was still left vulnerable. Adam Benefield was allowed to walk free just hours before he killed her. The bail laws in New York State played a crucial role in this failure. Because Adam's charges were misdemeanors, the judge had no power to hold him, no matter his violent past, no matter the evidence of his dangerous behavior. Kiara's life, her safety, was determined by a piece of paper. an order of protection that did nothing to stop the man who had already shown he was capable of murder. Legal experts and advocates began to demand change. They called for judges to have the discretion to consider the dangerousness of a perpetrator, not just the charges they faced. They argued that violent offenders shouldn't be allowed to walk free simply because of a legal technicality. But for Keira and so many others, these calls came too late. The question remains, how many more lives will be lost before the law changes? For Keira's family, the pain of her death would never fade. Her mother, Tammy Hudson, would never see her daughter again. Her children would grow up without the love and protection of their mother. But in the wake of this tragedy, the family refused to remain silent. They fought, not just for justice, but for change. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cheektowaga Police Department and the town of Cheektowaga, claiming that they knew Adam's violent history and had failed to protect Keira. The family's fight wasn't just about holding one man accountable. It was about changing a system that had let them down, and they weren't alone. Across the country, domestic violence activists rallied around Keira's story. They used her death to shine a light on the failings of the justice system, demanding reforms to better protect women and children from violence. Keira knew. She saw it coming. She knew what he was capable of. She knew the danger she faced. And yet, despite everything she did to protect herself, despite everything she did to make the world see the truth, she was failed. Keira predicted her own murder. She wore a bulletproof vest that morning because she knew he would come for her. She posted the footage of him attacking her, hoping that someone, anyone, would listen. But in the end, the system failed her. The justice system failed her. The very laws that were supposed to protect her allowed her killer to walk free. Keira did everything right. She warned the world. She begged for help. And yet, she still ended up dead. The question isn't if this will happen again, it's who will be next. How many more lives will be lost before the system listens? How many more victims will have to scream for help before someone hears them? Keira's story is a tragic reminder that no one should have to live in fear. No one should have to fight for their life alone, and yet her story is far from unique. There are countless others, women, children, families, who are trapped in violent situations with no way out. So the question now is, what will we do about it? Will we continue to let this happen? Or will we stand up, speak out, and make sure that no more lives are lost to the same failures? Keira's death must be more than just another statistic. It must be the spark that ignites change. The time for silence is over. The time for action is now. We owe it to Keira. We owe it to her children. We owe it to everyone who has ever been trapped in the same cycle of fear and abuse. The question we all must ask ourselves now is this: should judges have the power to detain dangerous offenders? Could the system have stopped this from happening? Could Keira still be here if the law had done its job? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This case doesn't just end with Keira. It's a reminder of how many others are suffering right now in silence with no way out. We need change. We need voices to rise. If you believe that no one should have to live in fear of their own partner, then share this story. Like this video, share it with your friends, and help spread awareness about the dangers of domestic violence. This isn't just Keira's fight. It's the fight of every woman, every man, and every child who is facing abuse every day. We need to stand together, raise our voices, and make sure this doesn't keep happening. Keira's story deserves to be heard, and together, we can make sure it's not in vain.